So, for paper, the standard comic book paper that people are going to be drawing on, the mangaka are going to be drawing on it, the American comic book artists are going to be drawing on it, the European cartoonists are going to be drawing on it, everyone, is Bristol. Bristol board is a it's a thick paper, and you can get it with a rough surface or a smooth surface. I like the smooth surface. I think a lot of people use the slightly rougher surface, but it's kind of somewhere. It's pretty thick, and it's kind of somewhere in between regular paper and cardboard. It's a really thick paper, and yeah, this has a really nice smooth finish to it, which makes inks kind of like it'll let your brush slide over it real well. And it's useless to just look at white, but yeah, they do, like, this comes in 20 sheets, and this is a huge piece of paper because I draw pretty large, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Yeah, so Bristol Smooth Surface 300 series. I think other people use the 500 series, which is maybe the like toothier one. But yeah, 20 sheets. This is 19 by 24. 20 sheets. This stuff can get pretty expensive, so I actually like to buy the bigger ones, not only because I draw very large, but also because I can cut them up and, instead of buying 2 pads of paper, basically. So Bristol, this is the standard type of paper that people use. Bristol board. Great for digging those pens, those dip pens in there. And there are different ways that you can do this. So you can just buy blank Bristol boards, and I do recommend the Strathmore brand. Then Canson, which is like the lower shelf Strathmore. Still good quality, but I prefer Strathmore. So this, you've probably seen this. I don't know. If you can see the blue lines on the board there, it says comic book art board, and there are blue lines all around it, already ruled out, so that this is the actual size of a standard comic book art board. The standard size that you're going to be drawing at. So this is what's called your live area here, which is basically everything important is going to go inside of this box. When I do this, if you're not going to be breaking the panel borders, I just draw all of my panels around this. And then there's the, I don't know what it's called, but you can basically draw outside of it up into this second line here, and then there's a third line, which is the trim line, so where the paper, or this is the whole size of the paper, is the outermost line. Then there's a trim line, which is where it's going to be cut, so you can draw to the edges of the paper, but after that it's going to be cut off. So the live area is really the comic book size. If you open up a comic book, and this is where all the edges of the border of the panels are going to sit. And oh gosh, I wish I had it on hand, just the size of it. This is an 11 by 17 page, and I want to say it's like 1075 by something. I guess maybe I could put that on the screen or in the description or something, because that's very important to know what size, but I'll also be getting to that in a minute. So yeah, you can buy these comic book art boards. DC and Marvel have their own boards that they give to their artists And then I think they have like a slightly lesser quality board that anyone can buy. I've heard that the DC boards are better than the Marvel boards. But yeah, so this has all of your guidelines already ruled out on it in these pads that you can just rip off and use. So that's pretty useful. This other pad that has been up on here is another Strathmore pad, very large, same size. And it's just like regular sketching paper, like thin sketching paper, which is good for, yeah, just like scratching things out, doing the real rough stuff, and then tracing it onto the Bristol board. Some people draw directly on the Bristol board, that's fine. There takes many iterations for me to get to the final drawing, so I like to trace. And so, speaking of which, tracing paper, really useful. Highly recommend getting some tracing paper because comics is a long process. Drawing and redrawing is going to help you get your image to where it needs to be in terms of like cartooning. I think it was the cartoonist Seth that said that comics is less about drawing and writing and more about design and poetry. And the design aspect is like, it doesn't need to look realistic. It just has to have like a certain appeal to it. Like that's what cartooning is. It has to like have a certain aesthetic quality that makes it like somewhat easy to read, maybe a little more embellished, so you see like if you think about an anime character, those big eyes, they draw you in and they look good and they portray the emotion of the character, but they don't look anything like real eyes, but they work. So it's like finding those things that work, and sometimes using the tracing paper will help you get to that stage. Also, you're going to be moving panels around a lot if you make any mistakes. You're going to be moving drawings a quarter of an inch to the left or whatever, so sometimes just maintaining that same drawing is going to be very helpful, and tracing paper will help you get there. Which brings me to the next part, a light box. This is just like it's not a box, it's just a straight, like a relatively flat pad. And this is great because it'll lay just like flat on your table. I have this rigged up so that I can just pull it down here. But yeah, these things are great. They'll go up, they'll go down. If you're going to get a light box, I do recommend one of these flat ones. It's easy to move around, easy to sit on your table. But there are also like slanted ones and like box shaped ones. But yeah, same as the tracing paper, just helps you get your drawing to where it needs to be, helps you recreate a drawing if you need to, if you need to draw it again, if you need to move it a little bit. Also, I guess I'll just talk about this now. The drawing board itself. I have my camera set up a certain way right now, so I don't want to move it around, but maybe I'll put a picture somewhere or something, or you can just Google it. But a drawing board is really useful. They are expensive, so just don't think that you need to have a drawing board. You do not. The main thing about a drawing board is having it at a slant so that you're not killing your back just by bending over completely all the time. But also because what someone will say is that if you're looking at a piece of paper, like if you're just sitting at a flat table and looking at a piece of paper without being like a full, like staring straight down at it, you're not actually getting a straight image. It's going to look slanted. It's going to kind of move in like this, like this, instead of, you know, flat like this. It'll be like that. So that's another thing about the drawing board, is that it gets it more in line with your straight sight, your vision, so that you get a straighter view of what you're drawing and ruling out. But that is not everybody believes that that's true. The other thing about a drawing board is it just gives you a large space to work on, especially if you're drawing on big sheets of paper. You're more able to flip things around and turn your paper, which is very important. If you need to get a line a certain way, turning your paper will help you get that line. Will help your hand move in a certain direction. So having a nice big space to work on is can be very helpful. And I find that when I go to sit down at my drawing board, it helps me like get in the mindset of doing work and drawing, as opposed to just like sitting down at the kitchen table and opting for having a snack instead of drawing. Okay, let's talk about rulers. Right off the bat, this is the ruler that I use the most. It's really great. I think you could even find these at like Walmart. But it just like, you can see right through it, which is already a plus. When you're spinning this around the paper and stuff, you don't have to be looking under it. It has these squares on it, which, like these grids, which is, in cartooning, you're going to be working a lot with squares and rectangles, so that's already a plus. Yeah, just two, on both sides, like a standard ruler. Really good for ruling out lettering and stuff. I don't know, it's hard to like describe why I like this so much off the bat, but I don't know, I just really recommend this ruler. You'll see a lot of other artists using it as well. Also a plus that it's small, so that you're not swinging a huge piece of metal around the page every time you want to make like little adjustments. But yeah, I think it's called, the brand is Westcott, Westcott. Yeah. Next thing I use, probably more than any other ruler, is a triangle. Triangles are really cool because sit it right on your drawing board, or oh, real quick, one thing that I forgot to mention about the drawing board is you can also get like these little boxes that are similar to the light boards that will just sit on a table at the angle that a large drawing board will give you. So you can maybe look into that as well. The triangle, so you can just sit this on here, slide it around real easily, and get a straight line. You can line it up with some other straight lines on your page already to get straight lines, to get good angles and stuff like that. Use this to do it like this, and then you'll have all your ruler marks on there, and slide that around and maintain that straight angle. So yeah, I use this a lot, just like small enough but large enough to go over a lot of the paper. And then just like, oh, we're talking about straightness, T-square just sets right next to your board or table or whatever. Move it up and down and get a straight line that way. I actually never use this. I usually just use the ruler to draw out the different points that I need and line it all up and run straight across. My pages definitely get a little bit wonky, but not enough for me to care about at all, or probably for people to notice, really. Yeah, so the thing that's great about certain types of rulers and this triangle is that this is what's called an inking triangle, as well as, I don't know if you would call this an inking ruler, but it is made for that. So when you're using a pen like those rapidographs that I talked about that are dispensing actual ink, like actual watery flowing ink, India ink, it's easy to, if you're just using a flat ruler, if you put an ink line down and then you move the ruler, it's going to smudge because some of the ink is going to seep under the ruler. If you're using one of these inking rulers or triangles, there's like a beveled edge to it, so that there's a gap between the paper and the pen tip and like the ink that's coming out of it, so that when you move it out of the way, as long as you're not moving straight over the pen, the ink, it will not catch at the bottom of the ruler. So yeah, an inking triangle or inking ruler, something with that beveled edge, is really important. You can also use it very carefully for an inking or a dip pen. So I would suggest considering that at least. Yeah, this is the same. These foam, these like cork pieces at the bottom of a ruler. That's what that's for. It just raises it a little bit so that you can do those inks without smudging. It was originally a flat ruler, but what I did was, this is a nice tip that you'll see other people talking about. You can tape like pennies or just coins to the bottom of these, and then it just raises it up a little bit. So even if I'm not always using these for inking, which a lot of the time I'm actually not unless I'm doing panel borders, it's just nice to have them and prepare them like that with the pennies if I need to, just so that I don't have to think about it. I don't have to reach for a different ruler if I'm already using one. Circle template, very useful for even if you're not gonna get a perfect circle with it. It's nice to have that perfect circle as a template. This is also a raised, it has these little beads at the bottom that raises it up for inking. So if I want a perfect circle in ink, I can do that with this. I'd like to get a bigger one, especially since I do work larger, but you can see that it'll fit right into one of these standard page panels. French curves. I actually don't know the right way to use these, but what I suspect and how I use them is that if I'm drawing a curve, like say just this character's hair here or something, or even maybe this bubble, which is not a perfect circle, you just kind of line it up like that. You know, you fit it to your needs, and then you can make a completely straight line around it. Or these are raised as well. These are beveled as well. So I just get that perfect ink line around there. And yeah, so they're all different sizes. You can get them in different packs. They're all different sizes. And so they just have like so many different curves to them that you can fit them to your needs. You know, you shouldn't have to worry about not having the right curve if you do have a full set, but it really is just about adjusting in any way that you need to get that curve that you're looking for. First thing, the way that this used to be done is you would have your completed inked black and white pages. Then the colorist, which was a whole separate job, assuming that it was a assembly line process where there's someone to do every separate thing. So pencils, inks, lettering, coloring, whatever. What they would do is they would have a reproduction of the final inks. Then they would use this what's called liquid watercolor. So it's just waterless. I mean, there might be a water base to it, but it's just waterless watercolor. You don't need to use any water with it unless you want to change the, like, you know, lighten the color a little bit. But you can use this with a brush straight out of the tube. They used a brand called Dr. P.H. Martin's. You can search Dr. P.H. Martin's or Dr. Martin's liquid watercolors. But they wouldn't actually use this on the final page. What they would do is they would, you can see it's really pretty, they would color on top of the reproduced ink lines. Then they would send that off to the people, to a different company entirely, that would make the, what are called color separations. So it's basically like different inked plates for the printing process that have the different colors on them, and they would approximate the colors that are put down by the colorist, and then that would be printed on the final page, you know, in mass quantities for the book when the book came out. So the colorist would use this liquid watercolor. I'm sure they could just use regular watercolor, but the thing about this is it will go on very flat. So you just have like one tone for each color. And there would be a number system with it, so that they would like set up their colors specifically according to this system that corresponded with the company that would then make the color separations, so that they're all clear on generally what the same color is that they're using. So there would be like they'll do like a red, they'll put the red down, and then next to it they'll write like R, 103 or something, whatever it is. And so then the color separators would then be able to say, okay, this is supposed to be R103. It's supposed to be this specific tone of red. And they try to approximate that as much as they can with the original colors, but it's not going to be exactly the same. But yeah, so they would use this liquid watercolor. This is like the cheaper brand, Ecoline. I haven't tried the Dr. Martens, but these are bigger for more or for less money, and it works for me. But that's not done anymore. They don't do that process anymore. If you want those flat colors, like in traditional comic books, if you want that look, that's probably best achieved on the computer. Since I'm a traditional artist and a nut about these kind of traditional processes, I wanted to get these to try it out. But since it is going on with a brush and stuff, there's going to be a different variation. It's not going to be a perfectly flat, opaque color, but just in that general ballpark of like a flat color. And I actually even like the variation a little bit, or a lot. I like it. It's just like my version of it, so I will actually use these to color sometimes, to color drawings. Hopefully I'm going to be using them a lot more to color pages. So that is liquid watercolor. This is like a related thing. This is colored India ink. I got this first thinking that it was the liquid watercolor or like a similar thing. It's not. This is like sticky and thick. like ink. It just has a color to it. Sometimes I'll use this as like the line drawing, and then use either watercolor or the liquid watercolor as like the actual, colors of the drawing. I wouldn't recommend using this unless you're trying to like achieve some kind of artistic, style. But for those flat colors, and just for getting the exact color that you want on the sheet, I would suggest these liquid watercolors. Otherwise, regular watercolor, this is actually gouache, which is just, well, I'll get to that in a minute. This is gouache, so it's a little thicker than regular watercolor. This is regular watercolor. These are all Winsor Newton. It's a really good company. Don't have to buy Winsor Newton. That's, it's just the same thing as the liquid watercolor, but you apply the water to it, you can get more gradients and tones and stuff like that. This is gouache. It's white gouache. So gouache is basically opaque watercolor. This and this is going to be translucent. Bright and, it'll pop out, but it's translucent. You mix this white with it, and it'll become opaque. So you have to work a lot of color into it because it will make it like more pale because it's with white, but eventually you'll get an opaque layer of color. These are brushes. I basically just use these 3 sizes. A pretty thin size. This is probably like a number 2. Yeah, this is a number 2. This is an 8. Oh, okay. And this is a 1 flat, just for those big washes. Yeah, you can get as many different sizes and variations of brushes you want. These are markers. I think in like the 80s and 90s, these became kind of a bigger thing. If you're familiar with Copic markers, those are really popular right now. Same thing, it's an alcohol-based marker. Actually, this specific brand has like some really toxic chemicals in them. If you start using one, you'll notice that the whole room starts stinking like something that'll give you cancer, which it will. So be careful with these, have ventilation, but these I find go on, they're like really juicy, really saturated, much more consistent than the Copic markers. So if you want to try these out, these are called ad markers. I don't know if that's a reference to them being used a lot in like advertisement mock-ups and stuff, but or AD markers, I don't know. This is by the company Chartpak. They make a lot of good art material. Yeah, it's a marker, okay? And for using markers, a good way to get a consistent color is doing this circular motion. But anyway, I won't get into that right now. You can buy marker paper so that it doesn't bleed through and it goes on really nice and consistently. You can also use it pretty well on Bristol board, but it will bleed through a little bit. But so let's talk about putting the color layer on your comic or your drawing. So after everything was done with the liquid watercolor system and the numbers and the sending it out to the color separators, there was something called blue line method. It actually may have been around at the same time, but I don't think it became a comic industry standard until later. The blue line method is similar to what I was talking about earlier with the blue color that will not reproduce, except this is just more for it not being as dark as the as a black ink line. So what would happen is you would print out your finished inks on a another piece of paper. You could use watercolor paper, whatever you want to color on, illustration board, and it would be light enough so that when you did your colors on it, they wouldn't really show up as like another layer of black. Obviously, you can color straight onto the black if you're that confident, but sometimes that will mess up your ink lines if you get watery colors over it. You know, it'll smudge. Or if you don't want to ruin those ink lines that you worked so hard on, this is a technique that you can use. So you get your either very light blue or a very light gray. Sometimes I've used a very light yellow. It just has to be a light color printed out even lighter, so that you color that whole page, and then you overlay on like a clear sheet of acetate is how they used to do it, the black lines. You put that on top of the color lines, you match it up perfectly, and there will be like they'll have registration marks. So there'll be like circles or lines, just lines like that, if you can see it. What I just did. I'll do it bigger. It'll just be like that, and then you match that up on both sheets. It'll be exactly the same place on both sheets. And then, so that those black lines fall right over the blue lines that you had. Now, to check this, to make sure they're inking in the right spots when they start getting like lots of color on the page and washing out those blue lines, they would have the piece of the black line acetate with them, and they'd tape it up over the, like on top of the color page, and they'd put it down and take it back up to just check their work. You can do that if you have large sheets of acetate or whatever, or you can just use those blue lines as a guide and trust yourself. But yeah, so they would color on the blue lines, and then now what you can do is, since we have computers and stuff, and this is what I do, scan in those colors, scan in your blacks, and then just place them on top of each other on Photoshop. Maybe there will be another video where I explain a good way to get your blacks separated so that you can just put them, so that you just have the black lines and you put them over color, yada yada. But yeah, so color on one sheet, black lines on another, put them on top of each other, and that's how you do like that two-color process. So then you don't have to worry about flat colors if you want that variation in your colors, if you want to really like painterly style, or you want lots of gradients, or something like that. You can just use whatever materials you want, apply them however you want, and then scan that, put your black lines over it. Yeah, so that I think is it for colors.